جلسة تناقش استراتيجيات مبتكرة لاستغلال الأراضي الذكي بهدف بناء مجتمعات حضرية متوازنة ومستدامة تجمع بين النمو الاقتصادي، الحفاظ على البيئة، وتحقيق الرفاه الاجتماعي. ونبدأ هذه الجلسة بعرض تقدمه السيدة ماغورا كارتر، وهي خبيرة استراتيجية في التنشيط الحضري ومطور عقاري في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. Welcome to the stage.
Hello, everybody. Well, thank you. I send you greetings from the South Bronx in New York City, and I am thrilled to be here. And I want to thank, first and foremost, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning for just inviting, our perspective here. And I'm really happy because listening to some of the panelists earlier today, in particular, His Excellency Ahmed Al Kayat, who spoke about the emphasis on the importance of both housing and economic development. And it was clear when he spoke about with such pride, the area that he knew growing up, which was Issa Town. And the fact that it was all about like there everything was in its place. All of it had so much that really resonated for him as a young person, feeling like all that was the town had everything that it needed for people to feel like it was super special. And this talk is about just that, the feeling that you have everything that you need in the place where you were born and raised or live in at any moment. And it's really focused on, I really took a page from actually business development as we think of this. So in particular, think about the fact that successful companies don't invest in talent so their competition can hire them away. They keep their people motivated to grow with the company and inspire those around them to lean in with them. And I believe that talent retention, the same tool that's used to grow successful companies, is an innovation that can also be used to build great neighborhoods for the people that are born and raised there. No, my hometown is the South Bronx in New York City, and it's the kind of neighborhood that one might say resembles a talent repulsion strategy. So back in the 1980s, I walked by this particular drug den on the way to the subway that took me to one of the best high schools in the country. It was called the Bronx High School of Science. Neighborhoods like these are the places where inequality is assumed by those who live there and by everyone on the outside looking in. Now, these are the places where schools or public health, air and water, parks and trees, food options, and career opportunities are all worse than in other parts of the same town. Now, government subsidized social housing and health clinics, homeless shelters, liquor stores. There are few banks, but many places that charge you to use the money you may have. Places like check cashing stores or predatory loan companies. And I refer to these communities as low status. I don't call them poor or low income or underprivileged, not because they usually are, but that's not the point. The point is that status implies that something larger is at work, that inequality is a well established fact. Now, think of the communities like this wherever you're from, and they're everywhere. They're in cities, they're in rural areas, they're in suburbs. They impact all races, and they are all over the world in rich and poor countries. And the bright kids who grow up in them are expected to measure success by how far they get away from those neighborhoods. And I know this because I was one of those kids, and now I'm a real estate developer and a strategy consultant. Now, I work nationally and sometimes internationally, but the South Bronx is my research and development lab for restorative community development using a talent retention approach. The two big factors that we've identified for talent retention in communities are home ownership and vibrant local third spaces. And third spaces, it's sort of like fancy urban planning talk for places that are neither work nor home, but give you an opportunity to meet up with others and like yourselves and share not only food and drinks, but ideas and career goals and opportunities. In other words, it builds communities. That's what third spaces do. Now, that place that was once a drug den is now it's now an award-winning hip hop cafe that I started called the Boogie Down Grind, and it's 2 blocks away from the house I grew up in, and around the corner from my current home. And third spaces like cafes or art galleries, churches played a really important part in planning that led to the founding of great movements around the world. For example, some of the planning that created the revolution that freed the United States from the British rule happened in taverns. But, and it's a big but, the revolution, that revolution wasn't meant to liberate everyone, and we are still dealing with those impacts to this day. However, I truly, truly believe that the same tools that can be used to either build people and the communities that they're in, build them up, or those same tools can be used to tear them down. It is really the spirit behind the application that determines the outcomes. And I think of the sort of like the scope of the public and private partnerships in Bahrain, which really, as that they were described here, I really felt that there was a really an understanding of like feeling that they knew what was happening in the communities, and therefore they wanted to work to make that happen. But again, if the spirit behind it is not that, it does affect the outcomes. Like for example, U.S. capitalism supported slavery and Black Wall Streets. And Black Wall Streets were those communities of Black folks. They were formerly enslaved or just one generation out, where they built these thriving businesses and wealth. And the most famous of them was a town in Greenwood called Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But but those Black Wall Streets were burned down, and this is pictures from the one in Tulsa, and the Black people murdered by white mobs quite savagely and without consequence. Now, Now, was that capitalism's fault or some kind of white American cultural distinction that remains unaddressed? Now, I know there's some people and administrations that don't like hearing about that, but imagine what it feels like to experience it or experience the centuries long consequences that have come with it. Because the point is, America has had talent retention strategies in place since its founding in 1619. Slavery provided white Americans all the benefits of its barbaric and predatory industry, while Black Wall Streets, although built on the same sustainable ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and property ownership, suffered consequences that we experience till this day because we weren't born white. Same system, but very, very different outcomes. Citigroup estimates that America's racial wealth gap has cost the US $16 trillion in just the last 20 years alone. Now, let's just think about that for a moment, about the money that could have made it into the economy, but didn't because of systemic racism that defined who benefited from America's growth. And I don't think there's any need to reinvent the wheel here. If we want to make in America or any place as good as its promise, then we should apply the same tools that created white wealth in America to create wealth in low status communities, especially in terms of property ownership and real estate development, because real estate development in low status communities in the USA currently takes one of two paths. One is what we call poverty maintenance, where you see the concentration of things like government subsidized social housing for the lowest income residents, health clinics and pharmacies. We see philanthropic dollars and government dollars pour into these areas, and the nonprofit industrial complex also supports that. And it almost seems to view poverty as an authentic cultural attribute of the area, and thus you'll see all sorts of programs that are designed to manage poverty, but the communities themselves don't really improve statistically. Money is being made from all this, but not for the local people. In fact, one can view many well-intentioned programs as a talent extraction process where the most promising talent is encouraged to grow up and be somebody, but far away from their own hometown. The other type of development is gentrification or displacement. Where urban populations grow, you have rising demand and limited supply, and prices will go up. Gentrification generally means outsiders coming in to change a community to suit their needs and desires, not those of the ones that are already there, even though people in low status communities want nice things too. And that's why they leave when they can to experience them. Now, neither gentrification nor displacement or poverty maintenance help the people already there to live in the kind of communities that we all deserve. But what if we looked at low status communities as though they were struggling companies? How could we turn them around then? How would a talent retention model work for those neighborhoods? Now, we know that municipalities hand out corporate retention packages because they believe the benefit of having economic activity is worth the price of the subsidy. We'll need to do that with those in low status communities that are led to believe that they should measure their success by how far they get away. Now, we can't force them to stay, but we can sort of nudge them or push them in with lifestyle infrastructure. The type of places that our survey data has told us that they're seeking. Places like cafes and bars and restaurants, farmers markets and bookstores, third spaces. They make the random positive community interactions and make people feel like they're a part of something that's wonderful and cool, and they want to be around it more often. Um, Another little gentle push is access to property ownership and business ownership that keeps people vested and invested in their neighborhood. So these things are kind of like stock options. So when the community does well, so do the residents, like employees in a hot startup. So how do we make sure that these benefits get in the right hands and appreciate and value for people in low status communities? See, now if you're in the US and you're accused of a crime and can't afford legal counsel, a public defender will be assigned to you. The same can be done for local property owners in those areas because before any real estate transaction goes forward in a low status community, we think the seller should receive quality legal and financial counsel so they are fully aware of the value of their own land and how to maximize it or just maintain it through sensible refinancing. And they could even do things like using the value of it to put their kids through college or even start a business. Or maybe property owners in low status communities um, could be classified by our Security and Exchange Commission as a protected class to protect Black wealth in particular and other low status communities wealth from the continued liquidation because it really is common for people who do own property in low status communities to be approached by these kind of offers like the ones that I've received, the solicitations that I did receive underneath my door at my house. Now they call me on the cell phone um, and we're trying to get me to buy my house for cash. These really fast cash offers, they can close in less than a week. They may seem very attractive for a person who has never seen any real value expressed in their community. It's all legal. But real estate and private equity have done a very effective job of increasing wealth inequality by separating financially unsophisticated people from their generational wealth potential. Now, we know that real estate and private equity firms can engage in predatory practices at the expense of taxpayers by privatizing the profits and socializing the costs. And a business model that reduces opportunities for home ownership also creates more landless renters, exacerbates the concentration of poverty, and statistically increases poverty's ill effects. And in the US, that includes not only lower health outcomes and educational outcomes, but it also involves higher rates of bad policing and even incarceration as well. It's kind of like what Dr. Zuri talked about earlier that the lack of access of good housing and I think other economic developments actually has a poverty multiplier. And I think all of those other things are things that get multiplied because of poverty in being in low status communities. So and so we know that that comes at a cost to all of us through increased social service spending. So it should come at a far greater cost to those that do these kinds of business, period. So another issue is that some renters pay more in rent than they would on a mortgage. But most of us who need mortgages seriously cannot compete, with the speed at which predatory buyers who show up with all cash deals. So a possible solution is for philanthropy to buy properties at market value from those who choose to sell and hold them so that other folks within those communities could have the time to get the financing and buy. And that's a beautiful and very valuable cushion of time that at least gives people a chance. And honestly, it's a very low risk place to park capital. Real estate always is. So, and these are just some examples of how we can use a restorative and talent retaining approach. And it's capitalism. It's still capitalism, but it's with rules and practices that favor the outcomes we need as nations. But there are folks that are on the ground that are already doing some really amazing work. And for example, in West Oakland, California, third generation West Oaklander Noni Sessions leads the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. They've acquired property collectively to build a permanent, affordable mixed-use development that includes resident owners. Now, the cooperative, teaches folks about this work through lunchtime learning sessions to help folks understand how to leverage real estate investment and development. And so currently, their membership includes more than 500 community, investor, resident, and staff owners. And they've raised more than 5 million for their community land and housing fund. In Philadelphia, Jumpstart Germantown was started by a commercial real estate developer named Ken Weinstein, and they provide training and loans to aspiring local residents, developers, mostly women and people of color. And since 2015, more than 1,000 people have gone through the program, more than 200 loans totaling more than $22 million, and the rehabilitation of 300 units. Or that process made more homeowners in communities and reduced blight as people are building wealth from the inside out and now making a difference in more than 13 communities around the country. Um, and up in Alaska, my friend Dune Lankard of the Eyak tribe is securing livelihoods for Native youth and women through kelp farming and native ancestral waters. Now, kelp is a traditional food source that's been important, but is now known to be important for commercial applications for cosmetics, bioplastics, food, pharmaceutical products, including as an additive in cow feed to reduce methane. So he's competing against multinational companies who want to own this emerging industry. But more importantly, he's actually stemming the tide of local talent from leaving tribal lands and waters in Alaska in search of good jobs. And in the South Bronx, there's this historic rail station that brought my daddy. He was a Pullman porter. Um, in the neighborhood where I was born and raised, and both of his parents were actually born into slavery. But back in the 1940s, when it was even harder than it is now for a black man to get a mortgage in America, he won $15,000 in a horse race in LA. And then he carried it across country, cash, and purchased a home for his family near that rail station. And that rail station was acquired by his youngest daughter, which is me, who is transforming it into a multi-use talent retaining performance venue and event hall for music, weddings, gaming, performances, everything that's out there. Because I really do feel like I am actually the manifestation of my mommy and my daddy's wildest dreams. And this is what we're looking for financing to finish up right now. So all that to say is that I'm not saying that talent retention as a strategy is going to solve all the problems related to poverty maintenance or gentrification and displacement, nor is it going to fix, our somewhat sinking democracy. But we are not going to solve any of our challenges without talent retention. Um, because we right now we are building a lot of monuments that honor the shameful practices that created inequality in low status communities and that they face right now. Now, I don't believe we have to like each other, but we do have to build more equality to reduce the status gap that's actually built on racism from the very beginnings in the United States of America, at least, and carried through to this day. Because if we use the tools of capitalism that we have to build um, more talent retention through ownership and happy places like third spaces to come together in a restorative way, people in low status communities won't have to move out of their neighborhoods to live in a better one. Shukran, Jajalin.
Thank you, Ms. Carter, for this great presentation. أما الآن فيسرنا أن ندعو المتحدثين في هذه الجلسة للتفضل على المنصة. الدكتورة أحلام زينل، وهي رئيس التنفيذي لشركة العرين القابضة بمملكة البحرين. الدكتور فلوريان ويدمان، وهو أستاذ مساعد في جامعة نوتنغهام بالمملكة المتحدة. والدكتور غوستافو ليناريس، الأستاذ المساعد في الجامعة الألمانية للتكنولوجيا في سلطنة عمان. السيدة مشورة كارتر، فيما تدير الجلسة السيدة نادية سوان، وهي صحفية ومذيعة دولية في شبكة التلفزيون الصينية العالمية. نتمنى لكم الاستفادة من هذه الجلسة.
The right place.
I was going to say it's like a game of musical chairs, really. How about, oh, where is everyone?
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh no. Oh, that's very
Sorry.
confusing. Should we try and match match the chairs? Lovely. Thank you so much. Someone's notes over there. That makes more sense. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you all over here. And thank you as well for your keynote speech, though, Marja. Very, very interesting. A lot of thought-provoking stuff that went on. Great to have you all as panelists over here. So we are going to now talk about smart utilization of land areas to provide sustainable urban communities with our panel here. So we have Ms. Marja Carter, we have Ms. Ahlam Zainal, Dr. Florian, and Dr. Gustavo. So we've got a real mixture of real estate developers, urban planners, and also academics. So it should be a very good discussion, I would say. So let's get straight into it, because I'm conscious that we've got a lot to get through. So how about, may I start with you, Ahlam? If we look at urban planning and balancing urban planning, if we look at the high density development with the need for accessible green and public spaces, particularly in rapidly growing cities, how can we achieve that balance?
Sure. Thank you, Nadia, and pleasure to be participating in this insightful summit. And thank you for the Ministry of Housing for organizing this remarkable event. So I think in terms of density, it's key when density is combined with high quality architecture, with access to public transit, with vast green spaces, and with accessible parks. I think we've seen a general theme around the sessions that we had today and yesterday, that cities have to be, and the developments need to be healthy, comfortable, well ventilated, climate proof, linking people to nature. And so developments can create a balance between density and open public spaces by the integration of vertical greeneries, by pocket parks, rooftop gardens. So many interesting tools that could be added in the allocation of open space distribution, which could be, I think, mandated in zoning laws. I've gone through a recent post by the World Health Organization where they've recommended that the green space allocation per person is recommended to be at 9 square meters. And they've stated that, the Gulf is trying to step up to get to that number. And it's currently in Abu Dhabi and Qatar between 4 and 5.8 square meter, but it then ramps up in Singapore to 47 square meters, and then In Vienna, it goes to 120. So those numbers really show that we need to prioritize on transit-oriented developments. And with that, we can achieve more sustainable communities. Furthermore, I think that cities need to create multi-layers and multifunctional open spaces. Sorry, I don't know. Yeah, so multifunctional open spaces in order to leverage on linear green networks, and also to offer urban densities for developers. And with that density bonus, we can create more, urban parks within our cities. So I think another strategy would be community engagement, which I think is also key with data-driven planning. All of this would help to actually create more viable communities.
You had some very interesting numbers over there that you threw out in the way of World Health Organization statistics about the accessibility green space-wise. Very interesting. Gustavo, if I could ask you from an academic point of view, if you look at some of the comments that Ahlam made, what are some of the biggest barriers, perhaps policy-wise or infrastructure-wise, to achieving these aims?
Yeah, I think there is actually no contradiction to have a high density neighborhoods and have green spaces. It's in the opposite. So I think building up of what Ahlam said, and also the contribution of Florian, he was talking about what's their balance between actually, we don't need too many big parks. Sometimes we get this wrong in some planning, so that we have to provide a lot of green space. Actually, it's more important to have well-distributed pocket spaces. What they call in economy of scales in complexity theory, you need many small pocket parks which are well distributed, and very few big parks. So very few green areas which are attracting people all from different areas of the city. But you need a very well-distributed places where people can achieve and access by walking. And also, of course, the infrastructure, the pedestrian infrastructure, the types of mixes that we have in the neighborhood should support that people can easily access and very quickly access the green spaces, so that to make them effective and well used. Because it's also very bad to have underused public open spaces. This is not really supportive for the quality of life in the neighborhoods. So we want to have very intensively used areas which are accessible for all. That's the main demand.
It's a very interesting point. It's almost counterintuitive. You think about having lots of space that loads of people can get there, but in actual fact, you're saying it's more effective to have smaller spaces. And it makes me think of perhaps cities like London, where you have loads of smaller parks spread around. And then I know you've got Regent's Park and some big ones, but loads of smaller parks in areas that people can readily access from their front door. Marja, would you like to add anything to that based on your experience?
Yeah, people are social animals. Like, we like,
of course,
operating in packs. We kind of like to know who's around. And so, yeah, I think that was a beautiful example of that, because and the whole idea, I think, of being in community, it's like you can get to it quickly. Like, you want to be able to feel that. So I think that's a perfect way to describe it.
And Florian, I'd like to ask you, we're looking at some of the challenges. I mean, we talk about finding land to build these green spaces, but where can we find land? Even more importantly, in smaller countries. I mean, Bahrain is an island. You've got places like Hong Kong, where it's a small place, land is at a premium. So where can we find land for things like these future housing developments, so that people can commute less and they can enjoy the other environmental benefits?
Okay, thank you very much for this question. I think the land availability is also about coordinating growth. It's always about growth management. So when we are talking, also what Ahlam just mentioned, public transit, transit-oriented development, then obviously in these areas, certain density concentrations would have to happen. So this land around metro stations, around areas where the connectivity is rising, will always give opportunities for a bigger development. And other than that, I think there's also a lot of land which is just underutilized also in Gulf cities. It's because there was and there has been the situation of a lack of infrastructure. So in many central areas, downtown areas, also the fringe areas. And so these areas are underdeveloped, you know. So there's also actually quite a lot of potential for redevelopment. So instead of going greenfield or desert field, in our case here, we can also look inward and just to rediscover these areas. And I think for housing, of course, one of the challenges is maybe the demographic distribution, that certain areas are very occupied by maybe male laborers, or certain areas which might not be seen suitable for families. But this is also in transition. So I think with economic transformations going to happen over the next. So I think one of the things with long-term developments, they need time, you know. And I think we come out of a very rapid growth stretch.
Yeah.
And we are going now into a consolidation phase. And so there are great opportunities to rethink urbanism in cities. But this transition will be not so fast with what we have seen the last 20 years, you know.
Is there a cost implication there as
Yes.
well? Yeah. So, and is that kind of something that's insurmountable, or something that has to be planned for, or and has there to be some intervention from the government perhaps,
Yes.
or private development?
Yes, and we can also just put it very simple. In a very fast growth stretch, there's a competition. It's competitive because everyone who builds and everyone who's part of that competition tries to somehow make it work for their land and for their site, which is completely understandable. And then infrastructure is coming up or following these investments because they need to supply. Then in a consolidation phase, it's more infrastructure-led, so transit-oriented. So it's more consolidating, and investment has to have the trust in that infrastructure to be actually supplied. So
Sure.
it's not like we build and then electricity will come. So it will be electricity and infrastructure will have to be there in order to build.
Right.
And that is a consolidation which will have to come and integrate it just simply because the economic model will be different. And that is then also about information and communication when we talk about data, that there is that trust and faith in long-term investment rather than short-term. And that
So-
will be the change.
Thank you, Florian. Ahlan, just coming back to you, if we look at the topic of sustainability, there's a lot of hot topics. You know, we talk about sustainability, we talk about artificial intelligence, smart data. So let's talk about sustainability in this context. So in the region that you've had experience in, you've had 15 years in real estate development here in Bahrain, if I'm not mistaken. And overall, in your experience, you know, what's been some of the more effective strategies that that you've seen for integrating these mixed use developments and still maintaining the sustainability goals?
Sure. So I think in terms of strategies, prioritizing, again, transit-oriented developments, mixed-use zoning, the combination of residential, commercial, green spaces, and the access to transit hubs and to, as Florian has mentioned. So I think in the region, we've seen the example of Dubai with the emergence of Dubai Metro in 2009 as a rail system. And it soon became a very busy hub, attracting nowadays, I think, around 250 million journeys. And also followed by the case of Riyadh, where they just opened their metro. And with that, you're trying to have the communities exploring their cities and their attractions without leaving their parking and their private cars aside. So that, I think, coupled with adding concepts like vertical. I also wanted to mention other precedents. So the instance of some of the sustainable precedents in the region that has been successful is the case of Doha with the Mashariq downtown, and you have also Masdar city. All of this have included several, commitment to sustainability, to bringing low energy efficiency requirements. They have invested and delivered LEED certified and green buildings, smart technologies, and green transport, all of which now is redefining and reshaping the standards of eco-living.
I'd like to come to you, Marjorie, because you can see things from opposite ends of the spectrum almost, really, can't you, from your experience? So if we think about reconciling the economic incentives of developers with these long-term sustainability goals, where do you stand with that? What is that possible?
It's definitely possible, and I think it's imperative that we recognize that it's only impossible because it seems to be impossible because we've just only created this like very top-down approach to community development that generally means the folks who are doing the development are the ones who decide how it's done, and there's not really I think because a capacity to really, and especially since there's just so much. It just really does go back to low status communities because they're the ones being planned for and developed for, and they're literally made to be less than, and that's how they're treated. And I know that because I am one of those people, and that is frankly one of the reasons why I decided to go into development, because I realized that this whole idea that we've manufactured this idea that you can either, treat the planet well and treat people well, and there's like a big separation between them, or because we can do both, and we don't have to continue to, impact the poorest and the darkest people, and make their lives, marginally better in the name of trying to do better. And that's why I really do think that when we start looking at the kind of money that is spent in low status communities from our government and philanthropically, and we don't see, much of the outcomes changing, but there's always money to be made in those communities. You just think about with smart technologies and all sorts of things that we know are out there that could be better. Why aren't we doing that? And that, I think, is ultimately the question that we need to be asking ourselves.
And you touched on it in your keynote speech earlier for maybe some of the members of the audience who have joined us recently. Just talk to us a little bit more about the role that community engagement would play in making those mixed-use spaces viable.
I mean, I think of it's not so much community engagement as actually being real participants in the development of our communities, because again, communities have been developed by someone else, and I think that has led to sort of this bifurcation of, there are good neighborhoods versus not so great ones. And yes, and race and class have a lot to do with that, I think. But at the same time, if we really just recognize that that communities can be created, we don't have to move out of any neighborhood in order to live in better ones, through the application of more sustainable ways of looking at communities and recognizing that inequality is not something that's something that we create and layer into development. It's not something that exists on its own. And again, that's something we can do if there's the political will to do it. And if there's and definitely, like I can tell you point blank, from like having this little tiny coffee shop that we opened, creating that third space, like having people have those kind of interactions. We've seen businesses develop in the community that people weren't even considering them before. We're seeing people want to keep their own homes, as opposed to selling them to predatory speculators. We've seen the level of people standing up for their own rights because they recognize that they're not alone. And that's happening in our communities. And it's not just happening in my neighborhood, it's happening all over the country, I think all over the world, with people who decide that this is an important thing to do.
Thank you. Thank you.
I could add to that
yeah,
as well,
please.
if you
Yeah.
don't mind.
Go ahead.
And it was one of the things that was strongly done in the practice when I was studying in Japan. And so Tokyo really believes in community engagements, and it was part and parcel of their planning. And they had a term called Machi-zokuri, which means, community engagement. And with that, I mean, most of their communities, they gather, they take decisions hand by hand, and that helped, develop more efficient designs.
It's interesting that you can see how that works. I was going to say, Gustavo and perhaps Florian, from your experience, have you seen good examples of where that works, or even examples that are not so good that people could learn from?
Oh, I think very inspirational, these projects that Majora is doing. And I think one of the bottom line is actually exclusion is bad business. I think it's so important thing to realize, right? So that there is a lot of value in place that it can be even explored, and not only like starting up from outside, but using the structures that are in place. I have a very small project in Oman, which is called Where Oman Walks. It's not a
Where was it?
Where Oman Walks.
No, where was it?
In
Oman?
Oman,
Okay.
yes. And it's when I came there, so we were talking about you see the problem of the infrastructure, because we have rapid growth, single families, neighborhoods which are quite monofunctional, and because they have to allocate a lot of land. A very interesting project, of course, the way of developing. But once the city is reaching to its limits, so you cannot keep developing that way. So it's very similar in different places in the region. So I first asked my students when I came to Oman, and asked, how can we use that public space differently and to walk around, because we're using the car so much. And they say it's too hot. Everybody was saying it's too hot in here. And then I just arrived there, and then I went to the seaside in Şatikurum. It was May, I guess. It was 3 p.m. It was hot, really hot. And people were outside barbecuing, playing soccer everywhere. And I say, come on. So it's possible to use that. So it's just that the environment's not supportive for that, right? So then I started going around. I created kind of a tool where we did some community workshops inside the mosque areas, because the mosque is still the place where people still walking to for the prayers. And then you have all this small commercial infrastructure with a laundry, small things that the people walk to and say, I studied with some maps and those tools, but I said, okay, this is your neighborhood. How can we change it? Should we put trees, and where should we put the trees, in which ways, or how can we change the things? So there was a process that they should do that collectively, because everybody is kind of, they receive the plots, and then they pave maybe the front area where they park the cars in front of the boundary walls. So everybody does that in that small parcel individually, so we don't have an environment which continues and it's good for everybody. So, and I asked them, so how can we do that together? So you keep doing the same thing, but in a way that everybody can use it. So it's quite an interesting project, and but it's a small initiative.
And I think that's key often, isn't it, to get people to buy in, to involve them from the beginning, ask for their ideas, and actually have them physically involved in doing something like that. The buy-in is so much stronger, really, isn't it, than presenting them with a fait accompli sort of scenario, really, isn't it? Florian, let's have a look at a topic that we talked about earlier. Why is there this rising opportunity to have a community debate on how we perceive this private land ownership as a prime asset, and how does it affect kind of our daily lives? And let's throw the sustainability issue as well into the equation there.
Yeah, I think it's a very important question now, because land prices go up and up and up, and there are growth limitations of our cities. So we can't even expand further to outskirts, and the Kingdom of Bahrain is also a very good example. This means that future generations will have more and more difficulty to have the same access to affordable private ownership, land ownership, because obviously the land is also a resource which is scarce in itself. And while our parent generations all benefited from these developments, even our generation, the generation of our children, will not have the same access to the same, but the thing is, the habitus, the experience from our parents and grandparents is prolonged. So there's an expectation. But what we actually need is an understanding that what we are actually seeking is safety. So land always, what it actually symbolizes, land ownership, is a safety net, because that's an asset we have in our control and where we can rely on in our old ages, which we can pass to our children. So in a certain way, this relationship to land is quite critical worldwide, because once we start that we can actually create collaboration, and that our safety is maybe in the relationships to others, to a community, to a neighborhood, we might not need as much land as we think we need. So we don't need to expand. We don't have to get into the property ladder. We could maybe also just see that the growth happens in our relationships and not in our portfolios. So that shift would help sustainability a lot, because land is actually quite a critical question when we talk about ecology.
It's interesting because you're going back sort of many, many generations where it's just been ingrained in people's minds that land is security, property is security, and it's just changing that mindset of many generations, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about data, Gustavo, and smart technologies. So if we look at that, how can we actually leverage that to optimize land use without compromising issues like community identity and inclusivity? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think there are many ways to model different scenarios on how to create more intensive land use. There are few again, so there are few tools using agent-based simulation or cellular automata. There are those things being used with different ways of using cartography and GIS and all those things. But always it's also interesting to have some qualitative inputs on hard data. I think it's possible to have some different types of combinations being used widely.
And Florian, in your experience, I mean, is there sort of some particular data that you feel should actually determine that future density of districts, neighborhoods, individual housing, while we're talking about data?
I think maybe one aspect which we have looked at in Germany is also like that it's more about connectivity. Data is one thing, but it's actually the communication aspect which the digitalization enables. So that there are neighborhood apps, the district apps that we can organize car sharing pools, for example. So it can have a quite revolutionizing impact on the way people then communicate and help each other in sharing, for example, things and resources. So I think that our information age enables the opportunity to just know much better what everyone needs, rather than supplying everything to everyone twice. So I think that we can organize our interests in many ways better. So I don't think, again, it's not necessarily top-down data which will be the revolution. It's more that we know each other better. So I don't think necessarily that that this is a top-down aspect.
Please, Gustavo.
But I think one thing is we are experiencing these 2 days such a wealth amount of information about all these very interesting and innovative programs in housing. I think it's sometimes not necessary that you need more data, but for instance, it will be interesting to have some monitoring about how all these programs are going. And with time, you don't have to invent new programs all the time. All these programs are really nice and interesting. But again, if you can monitor how they are doing, what's the impact, what are the changes as well in the demands with time, and how did they work well, and how can you develop them and create other aspects. We are talking first only about housing, providing or increasing the house stock, and then maybe next time you're going to talk about as well how can I use housing for improve health outcomes, which is it's become a very important issue in the whole region. And then you can improve all these programs, and then with time and making them more efficient, more complex. And it's not really a very revolutionary or a very big amount of data. You just have to monitor it and rethink it.
And also, I guess, just not using data or using programs just for the sake of using them, making sure that they are
making good interpretations,
appropriate use and are targeted, as you say. Marcia, within your experience, so what role do you think things like cultural, environmental, economic context play in determining land use for using it in kind of a sort of a urban sustainability manner?
It's all of those are critical, I think, especially culture, because, for example, I'm from a place that's literally the birthplace of hip hop, which we are very proud of. It's one of the biggest cultural imports in the country, I think surpassing jazz, blues, and a whole bunch of other things right now, and rock and roll as well. But it was the kind of thing that literally could bring people together in a way that was just sort of like these rather informal ways for people to connect. And through that, like people sort of shared. I mean, even frankly, when our community was going through some of the worst financial disinvestment, where landlords were literally torching our buildings to collect insurance money because there was no other kind of financial anything coming into the community, and we witnessed that in the 70s and the 80s. There was still like a sense that we were in it together, and through that, and many of the folks who came up from the Great Migration or who were immigrants from the Caribbean, came to America for the American dream, and it was something that really did galvanize people. And there were larger forces, unfortunately, that made it nearly impossible for us to move things forward, but we still did. And I feel like that, and it was the culture that made us go, like, we can do these things together. But now I really do believe that it's, I do think we've got enough data to know what's working and what's not, right? It's just we don't need it. We don't need any more studies. But what we do need more of are those opportunities for people to sort of see how their future is tied up with each other. And that, I think, is going to be, because whether or not it's through cooperative ownership or individual ownership, I mean, the point is people just need to see that the investments that they're making in their communities is something that's going to keep them strong together.
And Ahlam, you've had international experience as well. You touched on your experiences in Japan and shared that example. So, how transferable do you think some of these successful strategies are in cities when you've got different cultures and different sort of geographical settings? What is it easy enough to transfer some of those, or is there more of an issue there?
So I think going back again with the idea of culture, it is part and parcel of the identity of the local countries, and that probably is not the knowledge sharing or the exchange that you can happen with abroad, but you would learn some of the key elements that have been done in other regions that you can implement and bring to the country. I think one of the successful examples of how culture and identity works hand in hand was the case that is exhibited in the exhibition down here with the Müşarek Berlin Trail, which was something that has started as a concept, and it showed you, the heritage and the history And with the international expertise, they managed to bring it forward to the state where it is currently. So, the exchange programs are quite interesting, and collaboration and transboundary sort of partnership and alliances is quite key. One of the good partnerships and I think networks is the C40 cities, which is around global climate networks as well. So, and I think also in cross-border sort of smart tech initiatives, that would also allow us to furthermore envision in future how we can standardize our goals internationally when it comes to sustainability and having more of our matrices more standard.
Thank you very much, Ahlam.
Thanks.
We're going to go on to, I'm just going to touch on mobility shortly, but just before we go, Marja, we've talked about low status in terms of communities, indicating that inequality is the condition that basically produces the outcome of concentrated poverty and talent migration. So how does maintaining those low status communities undermine government efforts?
Well, it sort of wastes their money, because when we think about the money that goes in to them, and I think then you add philanthropy to it as well. I mean, if you did look at them as a business, at those communities as a business you were investing in, you're not getting much of a return on your investment. Like if I can just be like rather Machiavellian about it. But I think that's the point. Like I don't think they expect those neighborhoods to be any better than they are. And that is the dirty little secret that I'm very happy to share. Right. And really why would we want to do that? And especially if when you can create value that adds to the tax base, that adds to community and regional safety for everyone, where you literally are building new opportunities. For example, I'm so excited that you've been talking about transit-oriented development so much because we're working on a concept for them right now, working with Amtrak. That's our national public railway company, and so it's a public entity, but they own all the land along the railroad tracks. It's like they're a national system. And so we're actually thinking about partnering with them and the property owners next to them to create much larger footprints of land near regional rail systems that are opening up right now. And it is literally creating new land and thinking about what are the economic drivers that are going to be coming, because hopefully we won't be diving straight into a recession anytime soon. But we do know that we're going to come out of where it is right now. We know that there's opportunities in life sciences and technology and green infrastructure, and we want to build up our space for that kind of things to happen in addition to housing. So mixing economic development as well as housing, different types of housing in particular, diversifying incomes, market types, et cetera. I think that's where the power is going to be, to show that how we can be creative about building these things. And yes, we are expecting, maybe not in the immediate future, but we do think that government is going to see that this is a valuable way to make some investments because there will be a better return.
Right. I've got two last questions, and we're going to just look a little bit further forward, and then I'll just open it up to the floor there. Florian, let's look at mobility, for instance. What sort of future-oriented mobility choices should guide these new housing developments and their location? Perhaps, Gustavo, you'd like to share your thoughts as well, but Florian, go ahead.
Yeah, I think first walkability. I think walking is completely underestimated how much it's actually part of our nature to just walk. And we got very used, actually it's only one generation now since the 1950s, 60s that we got so accustomed to have a car next to our house. So this opening up is quite essential, because you need to also walk to a public transit stop, to a car sharing facility. You need to walk to these other kind of possibilities. And yes, I still think that public transit, either it is a certain bus system or if it's a railway, there can be really beneficial to open up a new way of utilizing land smartly.
And quite often it boils down to that last mile concept as well, doesn't it? Actually getting from your bus station or from your metro to home or
Yes.
or your office, really, isn't it? That's kind of sometimes the challenge, which we've seen in the UAE. Gustavo, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's we should be open for different types. Definitely, I think the priority should be always be active mobility. Talking about walking, cycling is a bit more challenging in the region, but might come as well. And we should be open, I think, because obviously transit-oriented development needs density and diversity of users, of course, and until that comes, it will take some time. Until we get the right infrastructure in place, so that you can support multimodal mobility. So perhaps we have to make some experiments as well with some robot taxis or mini autonomous cars. I don't know.
Those are all coming, aren't they?
Yeah,
Air taxis,
I'll be
self-driving
open for
cars.
that. Not that will be the ultimate solution for everything, so but maybe a combination of different things, and we can model these things, right, and see what works. But ultimately, yeah, I'm with Florian. The priority should be natural walking for transport.
Sure.
Yes.
And let's just let's sum up with a little look into the future. I'll start with you, Ahlam, if you don't mind. So, looking into the future, well, what innovative land use models or international collaborations do you think might change the shape of the next generation of sustainable urban communities?
So I think sustainable urban communities can embrace more of mixed use and compact designs, as we heard on different topics, coupled with walkability, which we're all pro for, and also walking work to work and the distance to be minimized. And I was happy to hear today morning with the talks and initiatives that the ministry is taking forward in terms of having the proximity of work and live close to each other, which is quite promising because I think that would define the future of sustainability as well. Cutting those distances will bring less carbon emissions and reduce the impact on the footprint. So I think that's key to consider. Also, I think looking into coupling this with further ideas on vertical farming and on green infrastructure, all of which will lower, our waste and carbon and footprint.
And just before I open the floor to questions, would you like to add anything more? Any of our panelists like to add anything more to that?
Maybe one small thing. I think that what we saw in the West, and we are all here in the West, if it's US or Bahrain or Germany or UK, even Brazil, all here sitting are actually representatives of more the Western post-industrial, also consumerist societies to a certain extent. And I think what happened is that we have a split in a certain way worldwide of still industrialized, heavily industrialized societies like in China and post-industrial consumerist societies. And I think this shift towards more integration, to more productivity again in our spaces will also have a very different land utilization, because once we produce things more in our countries and not just import things from faraway places, and we rediscover the crafts, the fashion, and all these kind of things as a quite natural local production element, which doesn't have to be heavily industrialized with all the new means and tools. I think we create a complete different space production in our cities again. Because what we are seeing here with periphery living, shopping malls, car, and so on, this is all post-industrial. So I think we have to get aware that these things are not necessarily, as we move from heavily industrialized to post-industrial, we move again. And Henri Lefebvre always said this is the urban revolution. So the integration of spaces of labor and leisure in cities. And I think this creative community, or this rise of a creative, resilient community, will change the way we utilize land quite significantly.
Well, it's been fascinating. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights. So just before I let you go, I'm sure there's some questions from the audience. Do we have some questions for our panel while we have them captive over here on stage? Do we have a microphone somewhere, please? Any questions out there at all? No? Good heavens. Oh, you've got away very lightly indeed. Sorry, Gustavo, did you see a
No,
a
there's somebody raising the hand.
Oh, thank you so much. You've got better eyesight than I have.
Thank you for giving us this very informative session. My question is to Dr. Gustavo. You mentioned that it is very important to not rely on data and machine mainly on data. We have to integrate a little bit of qualitative aspect of that. Could you please mention any indicator, a machine learning tool, or any technique that you applied that humanitarian approach toward the, let's say, the quantitative aspect within the qualitative together?
Yeah, there is a lot of sensitive mapping tools, but also all the models that we are creating for transportation, for land use development. I mean, I think we just have to get to use the ideas that the future is just unpredictable. So there is no prediction that will be good enough. But there'll be always an interpretation. There are different scenarios that all these tools can give to you, and they can mix how you calibrate all these systems, influences as well, the way how the scenarios are going to be developed. So I'm not a super expert in this topic, but we're using a lot for transport simulation, multi-agent tools, and all those things. And again, the calibration can accommodate a lot of types of data of the system. But again, at the end, you definitely need a kind of a critical interpretation of what are the results again. And yeah, you cannot not just rely and see that this is going to happen, right? Because it's too complex. The interaction between people and all the social types of interactions with the physical, because you have always the physical environment that you have certain types of control on it, but the way how people interact, so the social component is a little bit less predictable, and all these things they interact. So yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, thank you very much to our panelists. Please give them a very warm round of applause for their time and for their knowledge. Thank you so much.
شكرا للمتحدثين في هذه الجلسة النقاشية، ومجددا ندعو سعادة السيدة آمنة بنت أحمد الرماحي وزيرة الإسكان والتنمية والتخطيط العمراني للتفضل على المنصة من أجل تكريم المتحدثين. إذا نختتم الجلسات النقاشية لمؤتمر الابتكار في قطاع السكن الاجتماعي بالنظر في واقع قطاع الإسكان وما يواجهه من تحديات تتعلق بالتمويل والاستدامة وسرعة التوسع الحضري. يجتمع في الجلسة المقبلة خبراء لمناقشة العقبات الحالية واستكشاف الفرص والحلول لدفع القطاع نحو مستقبل أكثر كفاءة واستقرار. يسرني أن أرحب بالمتحدثين في هذه الجلسة وهم الدكتور خالد عبد الله خبير اقتصادي من مملكة البحرين، الدكتور الصالح سقطي مدير إدارة الدراسات والأبحاث في برنامج جودة الحياة بالمملكة